Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Sheridan Skye, grateful to have you on. Had to reschedule just to make scheduling work, but it's an honor. And you're a nurse working on a master's in women's health medicine. You've been a coach for over 15 years now, and you've actually built certifications and a lot of education around pre and postnatal, and you have a certification through the Clean Health Institute where you do a lot of education. You publicly spoke, so it's an honor to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that we finally got there, so thank you for your patience.
Oh my goodness. And I've had a lot of your friends and contemporaries, people like Mark Carroll and a lot of other prominent Australian educators. I seem to have cornered the market on you guys. But I'm glad to bring you over. And I know I have audience all over the world, but it's nice to bring you guys more exposure to North America as well.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Right for the good stuff. Is resistance training safe for women?
Yes. The end. Goodbye. Great episode. Bye, everyone. Yes, it is. I think I would counter that question, Andrew, with why would it not be? What are some of the things that people say are dangerous for women or why they shouldn't resistance train? Because fundamentally, I can just say, yes, absolutely, resistance training is safe for women. I think if we dive into resistance training throughout the female lifespan, that is a broader question because there are a number of things that may happen in a woman's, I should say woman rather than female, a woman's lifespan, like pregnancy, postpartum, menopause, perimenopause. And these are things that biological males do not experience in their life. So naturally, with some of the changes that happen or different phases of a woman's life, there are sometimes questions that raise a bigger red flag, like pregnancy. Is resistance training safe through pregnancy? So is there a period of a woman's life in which you want to apply this broadly or just specifically?
Makes sense. So we sometimes get physicians, and I have my theories here, who will recommend their clients don't work out. And so I'll throw out what I've encountered, or I suspect. Number one, societally, almost no one publicly talks about the rate of miscarriages. It almost seems like it's a taboo to discuss the rate of miscarriages. And perhaps you could cite the statistics to start with. So what is roughly the rate of miscarriages with pregnancy?
So it depends on which country we're pulling the statistics from. From in Australia, the last I checked, around 1 in 4 women will experience pregnancy loss throughout their life. So it's high, it's 25% of women. Most women that you have spoken to have experienced a pregnancy loss. And you're right, it is taboo. I think that in the circle that I'm in, it's less taboo because we naturally just have those types of conversations. But yes, there is a high percentage of women who will experience pregnancy loss.
And this is really important to establish. I've even heard, almost upwards of like 30% or 1/3 even, but you're a more credible figure on this than I am. And what I suspect happens is a lot of physicians, and I mean, I'm Canadian, but I think American physicians especially are particularly vulnerable to or fearful of litigation, that if they say to their clients, no problem at all, it's perfectly safe to work out, the woman does, and then she has a miscarriage because it is such a common thing, that there's a possibility that the working out could get blamed because there is some traditional stigma about working out during pregnancy being unsafe. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that here. But I suspect and I worry that maybe physicians can be incentivized to cover their asses and bases and say the thing that, well, let's just rule out, let's not approve resistance training for women. And if a miscarriage happens, well, it can't be blamed on the resistance training. So do you care to unpack that a bit? Have you come up against this or?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that women, if they have experienced a pregnancy loss, there is an element of fear there. There is always an element of, did I do something to cause this? And we can become fearful of things that are unknown when there's something huge to be lost. if you are having a pregnancy loss, that impacts women really profoundly, especially if there's been multiple losses. I could go into a really big, deep rabbit hole with this, Andrew, but I think I want to start with just saying we have good quality evidence through meta-analyses, systematic reviews, which explore the question, does resistance training or does exercise increase the risk of pregnancy loss? And the answer to that from an evidence-based perspective, or what we see in these meta-analyses, is no. Resistance training exercise does not increase the risk of pregnancy loss. Majority of losses happen in trimester 1, and most losses occurred because there is a genetic abnormality within the DNA of the embryo. It is not a result of anything that the woman did at all. Now, I think if we unpack this a little bit more, when we tend to have a lack of research in one area and we don't know, the default automatically just goes to, well, don't do that. We don't know, so don't do it, right? I think from an obstetrics point of view, yes, doctors absolutely want to mitigate risk. And because of the history of, women in medical and sports science research, you can appreciate that there wasn't a lot of ground for doctors to say, hey, yes, this is safe, because we didn't have the research. Women weren't required to be in, at least from the NIH's perspective, in medical and sports science research until 1993. It wasn't made mandatory until I think around 2011, where researchers had to include women in their study designs and report when they or report what genders were used in those study designs. So for a really long time, we didn't have research, at least high quality RCTs. And to be honest, we're still really lacking randomized control trials in heavy resistance training. It's gotten much better with researchers like Dr. Margie Davenport, Dr. Christina Previtt, who are trailblazers in really exploring the question about resistance training and pregnancy. So the default became, well, that's dangerous. And also we had other research from an occupational setting. So this was observational research for the listeners who are listening. Observational research may show us a correlation. It can't show us a causation. So I'll give you an example of what that might mean practically. If we look at the rates of shark attacks and ice cream sale in the summer period, they increase at almost a similar rate, right? Does that mean if I go and buy ice cream and eat ice cream, I'm going to get attacked by a shark? No, right? No. Eating ice cream doesn't increase your risk of shark attacks. There is a co-founding thing in this situation that is separate from the shark and the ice cream. It's summer. When it is hot, more people buy ice cream, more people go swimming. And therefore, there is a correlation, but not a causation. So when we have observational research, it's just observing something that happens, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one thing is causing the observation that we're making. So in pregnancy, the observation from an occupational setting is when women are bending, twisting, lifting for 8 hours a day in an occupational setting, there is an increased risk of pregnancy loss or complications. That does not mean that lifting causes that, right? Because we can't extrapolate an occupational setting where women can't rest, aren't doing it under controlled environments, cannot monitor their own symptoms, which might tell their body, hey, this load we're not tolerating this load. It's not the same as going in the gym, doing your sets for 45 minutes, however long you do it, and then going on your way. And then I kind of just want to piggyback on the fact that, there's a great quote, which is there are no solutions, only trade-offs. There is a cost to everything. So sometimes when we inadvertently go down the conservative route and we say, well, hey, I don't actually know the answer to this, so I'm just going to tell you not to do that. Don't resistance train. There is an impact of that because there is a cost to keeping women sedentary. The cost to keeping prenatal women sedentary is an increase of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, maternal depression. We see women who do have gestational diabetes have a higher risk of their children having type 2 diabetes later in life. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. So when we go down the conservative route, we are also trading the offset of that with what could happen in the future. But exercise does not increase your risk of pregnancy loss. And I just would love women to know that if you've experienced a loss, you did not cause it. There is nothing that you did to cause that loss. It's unfortunate, but you did not cause that.
So you went into part of the next question, which is, do mom and baby have better outcomes when the mother works out?
Yes. So I mentioned some of them already. Reduced risk of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, maternal depression, which is a really big one, and postnatal depression as well. But we remove kind of the medical risks when we think about postnatal recovery. How do women recover in the postnatal period? Do we see them return back to their baseline of bone mineral density, because that's lost throughout pregnancy? What about muscle mass? What about body composition in general? Because the reality is that women's body compositions change throughout pregnancy. And there are certain body compositions that increase our risk of other conditions like cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, for example. And resistance training or exercise reduces all of these. And there's also some really good research to show that women who do exercise throughout pregnancy experience similar aches and pains throughout pregnancy, because you're growing a baby, your ribs, your pelvis, your muscles are adjusting. And women really commonly experience back pain. But when you compare that back pain or pain in general to women who are sedentary, women who are active do experience the common aches and pains that are associated with pregnancy, but in a much lesser degree. And women who don't resistance train experience more pain. And that goes on into the postpartum period as well, because it's not necessarily about the changes that occur throughout pregnancy, although that's an important factor. It's what happens when we become sedentary. And there's that saying, you don't use it, you lose it. Very relevant in this conversation.
That is extremely logical. I mean, and 9 months, or even if, once you discover pregnancy, let's say it's 7.5 or even 8, that's a very long window to allow yourself to become deconditioned. And then you have a lot of work to come out of it. And let's say, hypothetically, you have a woman who has a number of pregnancies within like a slightly narrower window. You could actually have a pretty solid chunk of time where you're actually not only not working out, but physically regressing and deconditioning.
Exactly. And, when you look at how many women have children, the majority of women will choose to have children throughout their life if they have the ability to. And of those women who have children, most of them will have more than one child. But then not only with the pregnancy, there's the breastfeeding, there's the postpartum period, there's the sleep deprivation, there's interruption to being able to access, going and resistance training or exercising because you're looking after a baby, consuming high quality food. We forget that after pregnancy, there is a period of time where a woman's life is really flipped upside down, and she will experience more barriers in her postpartum period than she's ever experienced in her life. And it's a period of time where we tend to create the most amount of fear around movement. Don't do this, you'll make your abdominal separation worse. Don't do this, it causes prolapse. Don't do this, you'll injure yourself. Don't do this, it'll impact your milk supply. And we create so much fear, and fear doesn't help people engage in the things that we know benefit them. It removes them from it. They move further away because what they fear, they move away from. That's human nature. And we unfortunately do this to a significant degree to postpartum women.
Are there any medical conditions where working out is contraindicated?
In pregnancy?
Yes.
Yes. So there are what are called absolute and relative contraindications to exercise. So think about your absolute like a red light. We have a traffic light system. Red light means no, this is not safe. The risk of the exercise complicating the pregnancy is very high. So the risk to reward ratio is in favor of not exercising. Then there's an absolute contraindication. So this is your yellow light, your amber light, and it says okay, cool. We want to stop. We want to just observe, but the benefits of exercise at this time still outweigh the potential risks of this exercise. Now, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have a list of absolute and relative contraindications to exercise in pregnancy. If you have an absolute, you will generally be put on what's called pelvic rest. We used to do bed rest, but we found that, hey, keeping a woman in a bed for 9 months is not that great for a lot of different outcomes. So now it's generally pelvic rest, which means, yeah, look, Andrew, that's ambiguous. I would love to know what that means. We haven't yet that place in the research to say, what does that mean? But generally speaking, it means, going about your day-to-day activities, grocery shopping, doing whatever you need to do, but you're not doing any physical activity that's causing exertion for at least the duration where you have those contraindications. But outside of those contraindications, the exercise that women do in pregnancy really does not need to change significantly to what they were doing pre-pregnancy. And I think there's this belief that, now that you're pregnant, you have to completely reinvent the wheel. And that's just not the case.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And Macros First is my go-to app for me and my clients. Macros First has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like, 1, AI search. AI is everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. 2, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And 3, this one's a big one for nutrition coaches. Follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of Macros First free for 14 days. Just download Macros First from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code Andrew. Are there any things that we would recognize, like layman's terms, common disorders or conditions? And what percentage of women probably would have these to where they probably can't work out?
I don't know the specific statistics in regards to how many women have absolute contraindications, but it's a small minority. This is a minority of women. It's not the majority of women. And if there is a complication and women are getting appropriate obstetric care, they're going to know that they have that contraindication because their doctor is going to mention it to them. And it's up to their doctor to tell them what is or isn't appropriate for them in their pregnancy. And there's a whole list of different complications. You've got placenta previa, you have placental abruption. There are lots of different things, uncontrolled preeclampsia, and they all kind of fit into different varieties of the absolute to relative contraindications. But that's not really something the woman has to be aware of. That's something that her healthcare provider should be making her aware of. But if she was to go into a doctor's office and they would say, hey, you have this condition, I would just encourage her, go to the ACOG website, look up the absolute and relative contraindications. Is your condition there? And if it is there and you haven't been guided by your doctor, ask them very specifically, what are my limitations and how do I take that into my training? If it's absolute, you'll generally be on pelvic rest. If it's relative, there's a little bit more ambiguity in there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does. It doesn't sound to me like there's any like big obvious ones that are really common. It's, again, doctors will take care of it by and large. And, it's a very small percentage. You mentioned earlier, and I wanted to go deeper. Can exercise help improve symptoms of postpartum depression? By the way, guys, forgive my voice. I just flew back from the Arnold. I was there at a booth. It was loud and I was yelling over the noise and everything. I'm wearing for the video people, new Arnold Classic t-shirts. So the voice is a little bit raw.
You sound great. Your question. Yes. Exercise does improve the rates of postpartum depression, but that's kind of general across the board, Andrew. If you were to ask someone the question, does exercise improve mental health outcomes? Absolutely, it does. It's no different in the postpartum period. It's no different in pregnancy. And if women are, told not to resistance train again in the postpartum period, it's really underutilizing such a powerful tool that we know improves mental health outcomes, because it helps not just mental health, but if we think about the postpartum environment where women are sleep deprived, exercise helps mitigate the effects of chronic sleep deprivation. So I know that in the, let's call it the optimal world, there's this recommendation not to resistance train or not to exercise when you've had a bad night's sleep or multiple bad nights sleep. Parents, that information is not for you. It is not relevant for you. You are not you do not have the same 24 hours as someone who can control every element of their life. And if you are chronically sleep deprived, yes, you should be resistance training. You should be doing exercise because it mitigates some of the downsides that we see with sleep deprivation. Now, are you maxing out at, your max capacity? Are you going for Olympic records? No, but regular training within the ability that you have for that day is absolutely recommended for physical and mental health.
It's another one of these trade-offs. One of the independent and acute risk factors of injury is poor sleep. However, if you're chronically poor, underslept, which, as you said, we now have good evidence, and it's one of the things I have flipped my opinion on. Although I think in the context of a young parent who is definitely dealing with sleep issues, or maybe someone who chronically deals with insomnia, then yes, bias towards exercise. The caveat, and what I've always said is, if I have someone whose goal is fat loss, who sleeps normally, and they're making the choice to cut sleep to do more cardio for fat loss, I believe that's probably counterproductive in most cases, right? So, but those are two different things. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about optimizing outcomes, and I would agree with you. If you're scrolling social media instead of getting your 7 to 8 hours of sleep, there is an incongruence between the goal that you say is important to you and your behavior. It's self-induced. It's not self-induced when your baby's waking up every 2 hours to breastfeed and you're dying. You think, both my postpartum periods, I wondered, can humans die? I Googled, can humans die of sleep deprivation? Apparently we can, but I think it takes a lot to get there because I'm still standing.
God, I wish I could remember. I swear, I don't know if it was like communist Russians, Soviet Russians had done some experiment, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it was in the US. I swear it was something in like the 1960s. And I'm probably way off. Someone can message me if they know this. I could Google it. But some sort of study where they had people sleep deprived and they kept them in this unit. And I think they had to end it prematurely, but it was absolutely horrific what was going on, where they were actually like keeping these people from sleeping at all, which of course is extreme. So it would be inhumane and unethical to try something nowadays. The shit that they used to do.
No, you wouldn't be able to do it. So many things slid in the 1950s that just wouldn't pass in moral and ethical standards for today. Yeah.
All right. Big side quest. What are the evidence-based guidelines for returning to exercise activity, physical activity, post-pregnancy?
Yeah, big question. So the first thing I'll start with, Andrew, is there was once this understanding that women had to wait 6 weeks postpartum. You get your 6-week postpartum check, you get ticked off by your doctor, you're good to go back to your pre-pregnancy standards. And we now have newer research actually coming out of Canada. So Margie Davenport is a Canadian researcher. I think she's out of Alberta, but don't quote me on that. And
I've interacted with her. I'm just going to double check here, but yeah, we've chatted.
Yeah. So so her and colleagues basically went through putting through a very detailed return to postpartum exercise, because we had, yes, that's Margie. Yes. Yeah. You're following her. Amazing. Everyone should follow. Yeah. And so basically there was a Delphi study that was initiated. So I had the privilege of being one of the experts in the Delphi study. And for those who don't know what a Delphi study is, when we generally don't have good quality empirical research, so randomized control trials,
Mhm.
even observational studies, case studies, what researchers tend to do is go, okay, well, let's convene a bunch of experts in this field and ask them what is their consensus on a topic. And this Delphi was, what are contraindications to returning to postpartum exercise? So what conditions would warrant you to need to go to your doctor, and where exercise, the benefits of exercise may not be worth the potential risks of that exercise. And what they found or what the consensus in the Delphi study was, there was no absolute contraindication. No absolute. There were some relative contraindications, but all the ones that people usually say, hey, women have to wait 6 weeks for, like, well, you've just given birth to a placenta and now you have a dinner plate sized wound. That's a really common one that I see on TikTok. You get prolapse, your abdominal separation will become worse. You'll have high rates of incontinence. That is not shown in the research that we have. And women who actually return to exercise sooner, provided they don't have these contraindications, have better outcomes in terms of their abdominal separation improving, restoring function, their mental health, and generally speaking, if where possible, assuming that there are not significant barriers in place, women are encouraged to work up to 120 minutes of moderate exercise by 12 weeks postpartum because it helps, right? So the 6-week wait is no longer relevant. Now, I am not saying that you should give birth to a baby and you should go out and start lifting, your back squats and your deadlifts. It is a gradual return to effort, intensity, and load while monitoring symptoms that might indicate you're not tolerating it. But as soon as you feel ready, and all women will feel ready at different periods. Some women are a few days, some women are a few weeks, some women are a few months. That is okay. But if you are one of those women who feels ready at 2 weeks, you can start gradual, strategic return to exercise. How do you do that? I don't think we have enough time on this podcast to go through how you do it. But what I want to say is the main priorities that I would usually take a woman through is the first block is rehab. The core and the pelvic floor has undergone significant changes through not just pregnancy, but in the birthing process. So that becomes the limiting factor if we don't build up the tissues of the core, the pelvic floor. And so I like to start with, okay, well, how do we generally strengthen the core? And I think people get really confused about, oh, because it's postpartum, there's these special rules. The same principles apply. How do we train the core? We progressively overload it through exercises that are appropriate for where that person's capacity is at the time, right? So I like to think about how you would usually train your core. I like to think about spinal flexion, anti-lateral flexion. I like to think about anti-rotation in the first sort of few weeks, and then adding rotation later, and build upon that. And then you have your basic movement patterns. You have your squat patterns. You have your hinge patterns. You have upper body push. You have upper body pull. You could split that more into horizontal and vertical if you wanted to. And you're working on those movement patterns and monitoring symptoms. Those symptoms are, do you leak? Because that's very common. Do you have symptoms of vaginal dragging? So that's the sensation like you have a tampon stuck in your vagina. And there's other things that could potentially indicate that you have taken the intensity a bit too far. So if you have an increase in postpartum bleeding, all women, whether they have a vaginal or a cesarean birth, are going to have postpartum bleeding. If exercise increases that, we might just want to take it back. If you're experiencing pain, let's take it back. But it's trial and error, Andrew. I think people get really scared. Like, if I go and do this, am I going to damage a whole lot of things? No, go and do it. See what feedback your body gives you, and base what you do next on the feedback that your body gives you.
You initially started to describe it as rehab, and I think there's something really important here. And I don't want to equate pregnancy with injury, but it is trauma, right? It is a trauma to the body. So, and then I can't count the number of brilliant physical therapists, people who really know the evidence on injury management and rehabilitation. And I think it's Dr. Katie Dabrowski says this a lot. It's like your rehab, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference between someone rehabbing an injury and training in terms of like a lot of the exercise selection of what it looks like. Now, the load and intensity, that's what you're managing. So it's just good load management. But I think if you take good load management principles and consider that you have a trauma to, well, whatever tissues and body parts have experienced that trauma, and you just regress the load, intensity, and volume down. And you kept saying, and I believe this is probably the theme that comes up the most in anything that is women-centric when it comes to menopause, pregnancy, you name it. It's each individual woman's experience, right? That is so much individuality to that. And as you said, trial and error, and then just apply good load management principles, progressions, not too much too fast. And
Yeah.
it's a bit of an oversimplification, but I think it could probably guide the process for most people.
I don't think it is an oversimplification though, Andrew. It's principles. These are principles that we utilize to, people gaining muscle, gaining strength. Principles guide us on how do we apply this, right? Yes, everyone's going to, their original application is going to look different. But, Jordan Shallow says it beautifully. Load on the enemy, poor tissue tolerance is. And that's such a brilliant way to put it, because we're not reinventing the wheel. And, when I was starting to learn about, when we don't have frameworks to guide postpartum women on how to exercise, I was trying to develop, what are the frameworks? Because I see this person doing this exercise and this person doing this one, and this physical therapist is saying, this is the best exercise, but what are the principles we're trying to follow? And it comes down to everything that you said. It's strategic management of load through planes of motion, through movement patterns that we constantly are doing every day. There's no other magic thing about it. So people, might ask, why do I do a dead bug over a bird dog? And it's like, well, you don't have to do one or the other. If you think about what's actually happening through a bird dog and a dead bug, you're trying to resist, that position and holding the position of the ribs and the pelvis together through movements where you're taking your limbs away. They're very similar. It's kind of like asking, should I do a Romanian deadlift or a stiff-legged deadlift? Like, well, they're a little bit different, but in a lot of ways, they're similar as well. So it's just about building upon the frameworks. And so that's why I like to say, hey, don't really think about what is the best exercise. Think about what is the exercise that I can do through a range of motion that allows me to control my pelvic floor and my rib caged pelvis, because that's the main thing we're focusing on, through spinal flexion. If I ask a postpartum woman to jump up and do a hanging leg raise, she's not going to die, but she can't do it. That's fine. What can she do? Maybe she can do a chest lift. Maybe she can do a reverse crunch. Find the range of motion that she's able to work in. Then anti-lateral flexion. Maybe she starts with a kneeling side plank. Maybe she starts with carrying a suitcase carry, for example. Maybe we can load that anti-lateral flexion through our lunge variation. So, if we contralaterally load a Bulgarian or a split squat or whatever that may be, and then anti-rotation, what are we doing there? We're thinking about your Pallof presses, if you're going through the rotation, your rotations. But we don't stop there, because it's the loadability. How do we improve anything? We have to be able to progressively overload it. So when women are told to get on the floor, do a whole bunch of bird dogs, do a whole bunch of dead bugs, do a whole bunch of planks, if she cannot progressively overload that, she's not going to be progressing and getting better and demanding more of those muscles. We have to demand more to create the adaptation.
Not to mention, if she's pretty strong anyway, and this is one of the main criticisms of things like dead bugs and bird dogs, is for someone who's strong. I always laugh at this. And again, I think some of this stuff comes from this sort of tribal battle over like Stu McGill's research, which I think there's so much good stuff in there. But then this reductionist and slight misrepresentation that, this is the cure-all for like super strong powerlifters. These really strong human beings there's nowhere near enough of an adaptive stimulus from a bird dog
Correct.
or a dead bug to change anything for someone who's already really strong. But to your point,
Exactly.
you have to find something that is scalable, is loadable. I love that you mentioned Jordan Shallow. He's fantastic. I've had him on in the past. Jordan he would get a grand thrill
Yeah.
out of being mentioned on a podcast that is predominantly about pregnancy and postpartum training.
Yeah, I DM him a lot because when I was trying to figure out, again, going back to what are the principles that I'm trying to apply here, and I went to every pre and postnatal certification and all the things.
Mm.
I'm like, just there's something missing, and so I thought, okay, who are people in the industry who work with athletes and work with really strong people? And what
Mm.
are the things that they apply to their programming and how they coach their clients? So I went to Sebastian Orb and I went to Jordan Shallow, and I memorize everything that they teach. And it is so similar. And if you go to people who are training athletes, it's very similar. And so I thought, what is different about a postpartum woman? What is different about a pregnant woman other than she may experience sensations and symptoms that a woman who is not pre or postnatal may? There are certain barriers and limitations that are in place. But we're not talking about principles, are we, Andrew? We're talking about barriers. The principles remain. It's the barriers that are different. And this is where I get, it's frustrating in the menopausal phase at the moment where we have this reinventing the wheel for how women should train. It's like, yes, we've got principles and we can establish that in the research, women gain similar rates of muscle strength. Their adaptations are very similar to men, if not identical, when they do the same and apply the same principles. The principles aren't the problem, it's the barriers. So men don't experience menopause, so they'll never know what it's like to have hot flashes and to be fatigued and to have things in their life that are, and they certainly have that, but on a different spectrum that are limiting their ability to apply the principle. A postpartum woman who's sleep deprived and taking care of a baby can't just go and train anymore. Her barriers are different. The principles don't change. Does that make sense?
Totally. And what you just alluded to is you're right. There are people whose names I will not say who are sort of loudly branding around. We can come to this in a second because this is another question on how women's training physiology is somehow mysteriously different than men. Like you guys are a different species, of course, right? Which we know is not really true. Not really. And so I've had Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple on the podcast, and she's been great at kind of debunking a lot of this stuff and showing, all right, here's where the research is and how a lot of these claims are based on weak to no evidence, rodent data, mouse stuff, et cetera, right? Dr. Alyssa Olenek is also great in this space too. So there are a couple of the people, they're PhDs of exercise science. So I really want people to go and follow them and dig into what they're doing. So this is one of the quotes that I pulled off your media. We've reached a point where women's normal physiology is being repackaged as a pathology and marketed as female empowerment. So I wanted to hear what your thoughts were. What are the narratives being hijacked and sold to women here?
I think touching on what I said previously, that we're trying to reinvent the wheel for menopause, pregnancy, postpartum. We're trying to pretend that the principles are different, and they're just not. So there is so much that I could say about this, but the fundamental challenge is that two truths exist here. Women have been underrepresented in medical and sports science research. That is true. It is also true that created a gap for individuals to say, well, we have the answers. So the second thing that is true is we're now taking that truth that women are underrepresented in medical and sports science research and saying, well, these are the answers and let's market it toward women. Because I think the challenge is that if we really strip back the research and we strip back what is optimal, how the data guides us, we have people. We have women who go into their doctor's office and they say, I don't feel like myself. I don't know what's happening. I'm doing everything the same. Can someone help me? And then they've got, evidence-based let's all say the evidence-based group saying, well, actually your metabolic rate doesn't change throughout menopause and muscle mass doesn't change throughout menopause. And to a person who's navigating something that they don't understand, that sounds like you're saying it's my fault. So then when they come over to this group where they say, we understand you, we see you, you're right, it's not in your head. Research hasn't been done on women. We have the answers. That feels like a safe place to go. And I understand why women are going there. And so we need to meet in the middle where we say it is true that women are underrepresented in medical and sports science research, but that does not mean we don't have any data on women. Because if you look at the data, I think it was around 2012, and look, this is from one research paper, I think the rates of male participants across thousands of research papers was 61% were male, 39% were women. Can we objectively agree that 39% is less than 61%? We can, right? Yeah. Does that mean zero? Does that mean we have zero evidence on women? So there are absolutely elements of women's research that are understudied. Endometriosis, for example, it takes 7 to 10 years to get a diagnosis. Up until recently, women did an exploratory surgery just to get the diagnosis. Women with PCOS, the amount of women who have PCOS who are undiagnosed is astronomical. We have areas of women's health that need research done on it. What we don't have a huge lacking of, which, you know, people who market toward menopause and female specific training programs and nutritional strategies want you to believe, is that we don't have any research on muscle mass throughout the female lifespan or the woman's lifespan. We don't have any research on how menopause impacts basal metabolic rate, metabolism, etc. We have that. We do. Again, we're looking at principles and we're ignoring what are the barriers, because 80% of women don't resistance train. I'm going to say that again, guys. 80% of women don't resistance train. That means 80% of women are not accessing one of the most powerful stimulus we can use to maintain our bone, our muscle mass, prevent dementia, cancer, and all of the other things that resistance training does. So we can sit here arguing about the perfect protein timing and the anabolic window based on light studies, and we can ignore why are only 20% of women accessing this? What are the barriers? How do we improve the uptake of exercise in women's populations? Because, you know, I think I'll just finish on this, Andrew. Dr. Jessica Nurick, she says a brilliant quote, and the quote is, when you get a problem right, but a solution wrong, your solutions will either become harmful or not helpful at all. So we have a problem. We have a problem that women are not resistance training. Women are noticing changes in menopause that weren't there before. But if we pretend it's because of, you know, estrogen, and if we just supplement with estrogen, all of that will go away, we miss the fundamental barrier, which is why are 80% of women not exercising?
A quick sponsor break for my current aspiring coach listeners. This episode is brought to you by Train Heroic. If you know me, you know I only work with sponsors I use personally and where I know the people behind the product. Train Heroic is the best online coaching software in the industry. Not only is it a great platform for one-on-one coaching, it's fantastic for group coaching and selling standalone programs. Train Heroic is used by some of my trusted friends, so I switched my online group program here, and my members love it, raving about its ease of use. Having a dedicated app means far greater reliability for my clients and has been by far my best experience with any online coaching software. Train Heroic is a proven and stable industry leader, meaning it isn't going to suddenly disappear. One of the biggest risks in choosing an online coaching software. When you start a free trial today, you'll get 90 days free to experience why I love and trust this platform. You'll get full support from their team, who've been a joy for me to work with. And I trust Train Heroic and the people behind it. Here's how to activate your free 90-day trial. It's 2 important steps. Number 1, go to www.trainheroic.com/liftfree. Step 2, reply to the email you get. It should be trials@trainheroic.com and let them know I sent you, or go to the links in the show notes. Well, you made me think of something, and this probably explains. So what I've noticed is when, again, I'll use Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple as a great example, when, she's debunking a lot of this female specific centric, physiology training stuff. And there are women fighting back, defending the purveyors of this dubious, questionable sort of information, saying, well, this work, this is my experience. I can't remember. It's like certain people are saying to women, you shouldn't train fasted. It's like, okay, there's a lot of reasons broadly where specifically someone just might feel better when they have fuel in their system, right? But people are defending it, saying, no, like I feel better when I fast, or sorry, when I actually fuel up. It's like, I think most people, it kind of makes sense. It's saying that you don't have, there's nothing harmful if your life, your schedule, you getting up first thing in the morning forces you to fast and then train without eating food. But here's what I suspect is probably happening based on what you said. It's the people who are frustrated. They are feeling not heard. I think that's critical to all this stuff, who they feel like certain messaging is good for them. And there's the basics of all of a sudden, maybe they feel psychologically safer, they have access to, or they start working out, or they start working out more, they start training a bit heavier, all basic stuff I think everybody agrees upon. They start feeling better, they start eating better, and then they start feeling better. But they also do some of the pseudoscientific stuff, the extra complicated stuff that feels very women-centric, and they feel better. And they misattribute the feeling better to the complicated pseudoscientific stuff, the sprinklings, when it's probably the fact that they've improved their resistance training, they've improved their nutrition, and they're actually seeing the known evidence-based benefits of the basics. Do you think that's what's going on in some cases?
I do. I think that we can kind of separate this into two camps. We can separate this into a camp of the 80% of women who aren't resistance training, right? I think that group of women are going to see the improvements that you mentioned just by virtue of doing the fundamental things that we know, the boring, unsexy things that we know work. If we think about the 20% of women who are resistance training, they do live a health promoting life. They eat their protein, they go to the gym. These women are also experiencing, to different degrees, feeling different throughout that perimenopausal transition. But I think where it becomes confusing is that we think of things like the law of thermodynamics. We know that energy, we have a closed system and energy balance exists. That is the fundamental law of the law of thermodynamics, right? Calories in versus calories out. But that is, I can't remember who said this quote. So this is not mine, but I cannot remember who said it. Calories in versus calories out is a very simple principle, but the application of it is far from simple because we have calories in, right? We have calories out. We know calories in is what you eat, but the calories out portion, when we consider, well, really, what is that? That's our metabolism. That's our BMR, our thermic effect of eating. That's our need. That's our exercise activity. It's not static throughout the whole lifespan. It changes, it fluctuates. And we get we hone in on, well, metabolic rate doesn't change throughout the menopausal transition. It's like, okay, that's true, but that accounts for 60% of metabolism. What about NEAT? What about exercise activity when you're having hot flashes and you're not sleeping? What about the effects that sleep deprivation have on body composition? We know that prolonged sleep deprivation impacts where we lose fat from. We're no longer losing, that calorie deficit is no longer creating a decrease in fat. It's creating a decrease in muscle mass. This part is very complicated. So women who usually have done all the right things and their symptoms, which will be varied across every woman, not every woman experiences puberty the same, pregnancy the same, postpartum the same, perimenopause the same, and menopause the same. For women who really struggle with symptoms, they're the ones asking, what the fuck is happening to me? and they're not getting those answers because we're all fighting about the semantic. And then there's this group of people saying, come, we understand you. It's not about energy balance. And it feels safe to go there. So all I'm trying to say is, I think dispelling misinformation is so important. It has to happen. But I think equally we need to remember that there are humans behind these experiences, and looking at what are the barriers, what are the things that they are experiencing, and understanding more about how that impacts how they train, eat, go about their day to day, not just simply throwing data at them. Does that make sense, Andrew? And am I communicating that in a way that, yeah, okay.
Clearly. And you're right, because people have to feel heard. And you said it, I think, twice in this episode, and I agree explicitly. I'll form the thoughts here. There are people who are great storytellers. They misrepresent data and information, but they are fantastic storytellers, and they make people feel heard. And it's one of the reasons why they stick around. It's one of the reasons why they win. They make the complicated seem simple, and they make people feel special. And they appeal to the fact that people, in this particular case, women want to feel like they're different from men. And therefore, if you give them things that make them feel like they're unique, their physiology is unique, resistance training, nutrition is unique to them, separate from men, then a lot of women will gravitate to that message. And if someone is a good storyteller and very good at branding around that stuff, it's very appealing. And it's like casting a spell over people. And it's hard to dispel it, right? Yeah. And it's very hard, especially to beat people over the head with blunt facts when you also aren't doing a great job of countering the story and having your own compelling narrative.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. The best marketers always win out.
Right. Everybody can find you on Instagram at Sheridan Skye Fit, SKYE Fit. Anywhere else you want to send people, any other resources?
I really should have another resource, Andrew, but I just don't. So Instagram.
Wonderful. I mean, they're going to find everything else you're doing there anyway. Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. Thanks for taking the time. Everybody, please go follow Sheridan, go check out what she's doing. And please, this is one of those probably a little bit specialized. I mean, I know there's a lot of coaches listening. If you train women, this is for you guys. The guys listening, maybe you have women in your life, probably still pretty useful. But there's probably going to be people who will hear this, and you're thinking, there's someone in my world, they will benefit from this. Share it over. Help me spread the word. Get this podcast in more hands. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.